IVM.
We would like to thank Storytel for sponsoring this show. Storytel is an audiobook platform that lets you hear hundreds of thousands of stories on your mobile, on your PC, wherever you prefer. You can get a great deal by signing up at storytel.com/IVM. But before I tell you what the deal is, let me make a recommendation for you for your first book. When you go to Storytel, search for James Clavell. He has a number of books, but I'm going to recommend Shogun to you. Shogun is the story of an Englishman who's shipwrecked in 16th century Japan and how he struggles to deal with the culture, gets embroiled in the politics of the land. It's a great story, and if it wasn't enough that you can get just this one book, James Clavell's Asian Saga has 5 more books on Storytel. So go to storytel.com/IVM. You can get your first month at 99 rupees a month instead of 299. That's 200 rupees off on your first month. Storytel.com/IVM. Go check it out.
Welcome to States of Anarchy. I'm your host, Hamsini Hariharan, and every episode I discuss global affairs and foreign policy, all in the hope of making a little more sense of the world. Before we begin today's episode, I have a big announcement. I get a lot of questions from people on Twitter and Instagram asking me to explain things to them. What's happening in Kashmir? What does the Chinese government's crackdown on Jack Ma mean? Why do we invite other heads of state to our Republic Day celebrations? And usually I reply to these one-on-one. But as 2020 came to a close, it struck me that many people would like the answers to these questions. So to celebrate 2021, I'm making States of Anarchy weekly again. Your regular programming of getting super brainy guests will continue. And in the in-between weeks, I'll be answering a few questions about international affairs. So if you're curious about something in global affairs and foreign policy and want to be featured on the show, just get in touch. You can email me your questions at ivmstatesofanarchy@gmail.com. You can also send me a DM on Instagram at States of Anarchy or on Twitter at HamsiniH. I've put these in the episode bio, so just copy-paste them. I'm very prompt and I can't wait to hear from you. Now back to your episode. For decades, India and China astounded the world with high rates of growth. Over the last few years, both these economies have been slowing down. But there is a bright spot in South Asia that is slowly gaining prominence. I'm talking about Bangladesh. In 1971, when Bangladesh was liberated, it had the highest rural population density in the entire world, an annual population growth between 2.5 and 3%, chronic malnutrition for perhaps the majority of its people, and dislocation of between 8 and 10 million people who'd fled to India and returned by 1972. But for the last 10 years, Bangladesh's growth rate has been higher than the average growth rate of South Asia. It's now one of the fastest growing countries in the world despite the pandemic. When other countries' economies are contracting, Bangladesh's economy is set to grow by about 4%. So how did Bangladesh grow from one of the poorest countries to the world's fastest growing economy in 2020? How has it made progress on social development indicators? And what can other countries in South Asia learn from Bangladesh's experience? My guest for today is the perfect person to answer these questions. Syed Yusuf Saadat is a senior research associate at the Center for Policy Research, Dhaka. He's an award-winning researcher who's undertaken research for organizations like the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, UK Aid, the Embassy of Denmark, UNESCO, and UNDP. He's the co-author of a book called Youth Employment in Bangladesh, Creating Opportunities, Reaping Dividends, published by Palgrave Macmillan. He's also a member of the South Asia Economic Policy Network and the Young Scholars Initiative. We'll get to the conversation with Yusuf, but first a short break to hear from IBM Podcasts.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great week on the IBM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, it's 2021 now. It's time you did. You didn't in 2020. That was bad enough. But now in 2021, you really, really should. It's IBM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And a quick reminder to everybody, just please help us out with our survey, ivmpodcast.com/survey. We've had a number of you fill it out so far, but we want to shatter last year's number, right? Really, really blow that up. Go fill out the survey over there. If you do, we'll select from the emails that we have got submitted, and we'll be sending out some interesting swag to people. So what should you be listening to this week? First thing I want to talk about is the unprecedented episode. We did a triple crossover. Vineet Kanabar from Storytellers and Storysellers, Varun Dugirala from Advertising is Dead, and Karthik Nagarajan from the Filter Coffee podcast all got together and put together a mega episode. Do check it out on whichever of their feeds you want. It's available on all three. And because it's the new year, let me recommend a few things just to make your life a little better. We have a number of shows which work on self-actualization and really helping people kind of get in touch with themselves and live their lives better. So do check out Begin the Journey by Ashish Vidyarthi, the Positivity Podcast with Chetna Chakravarti, and The Habit Coach with Ashton Doctor. Do check out all three of these shows, especially New Year's, where you're looking at ways to kind of keep your resolutions. They will help. And with that, let me get you back to your show.
Welcome to States of Anarchy, Yusuf. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Hamsini. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So the great thing about 2021 is that it marks so many important milestones that have happened. And one that I'm particularly interested about is in Bangladesh. 2021 marks 50 years of Bangladesh's independence. And a lot of reports that I've been reading recently have talked about how the Bangladesh economy is possibly the strongest now in South Asia and how it's evolved over the last 50 years. So can you give us a little bit of Bangladesh's economic history? How did it become one of the strongest performers in South Asia?
Number of things have happened over the last 5 decades in Bangladesh. And so things have moved in our favor in many of the indicators. And because of that, I think we have come out of our damage and destruction that happened during the war and emerged as one of the economic success stories of South Asia. And firstly, I would like to say that in 1971, the population of Bangladesh was growing quite rapidly. So one of the things that we have done is slow down our population growth rate, because back in the 1970s or 60s, it was like 2.8%. It was growing 2.8% per year. But now it's like only 1%. So population growth rate has slowed down in Bangladesh. And that has, I think, had huge benefits for us because, Bangladesh is a very small country, much smaller than many Indian states also. So in that sense, it was good for us. The other issue, obviously, you're aware of this, that Bangladesh has a very large pool of workers who are working in the economy, and wages in Bangladesh are quite low, which is quite sad for the workers, but it's good for international competitiveness. So that also was, I think, something that drove our economic growth. And one other issue I feel is that the female labor force participation in our country was quite high, like compared to some other South Asian countries, like compared to Pakistan or maybe even India. I'm not sure about India, but I'm sure at least compared to Pakistan, it was significantly higher, female labor force participation. So we had a lot of women working in our economy, which also helped us, to keep things going and also to add to our labor force. So a number of things have happened, and we have also become an export powerhouse. Our economy has basically taken advantage of several, international support measures for least developed countries. So those things have also helped us because that allowed us to get free access to a lot of important markets, such as the European Union and other markets. So we use those advantages to boost our exports. Then we have also seen several advancements in agriculture also, because in the 70s, Bangladesh was suffering from a lot of food security issues. Those things we've moved on from that, and our agriculture has seen significant improvements. People are now better fed, they are better nourished, and they're living much longer now. So those things are obviously there. So this is somewhat of a basic idea, and also healthcare, education, all those things have improved. So it has been a whole multidimensional development, I think.
Definitely. I think you've covered sort of a wide range of
Yeah,
things here, and I want to get into each of those in detail.
yeah,
I think the first would obviously be Bangladesh's garment manufacturing industry, right? One of
yeah.
the largest in the world right now, and one of the main reasons I think that the economy has done well over the last couple of decades. Why garment manufacturing is something that comes to my head when it comes to industry, because I think in South Asia, India took a very different route in terms of sort of trying to skip manufacturing as a whole and relying on services. We try to leapfrog that. I'm not sure how successful we've been in that sense. Why did Bangladesh go towards garment manufacturing? And what do you think are sort of the strengths and the challenges facing the sector now?
So I don't know if India has actually intentionally leapfrogged manufacturing, or was it something that happened because of, I think it happened naturally, because all over South Asia we see this problem that in the economy, if we call this structural transformation of the economy, that as an economy gets more and more developed, the share of people working in agriculture, it starts to diminish, and then the share of people working in manufacturing, it increases, and then gradually people move to the service sector where more people are working in the service sector. So this is a transformation in the structure of the economy, that agriculture in the primitive stages it's very large, and gradually it becomes smaller, and manufacturing becomes large, then it becomes small, then services become large. But when you leapfrog from agriculture to services, what happens is that you're missing out on some of the great benefits of manufacturing, because the manufacturing sector of an economy, especially if you're using labor intensive methods of production, if you're using lots of workers in your production technology, then it has a huge potential to employ a lot of people. But whereas in service sector, that's not always the case. Many services nowadays, because of the fourth industrial revolution, they are now being automated. Many services are now automated. People are losing jobs in the service sector also. So the potential of the manufacturing sector to employ people and to employ workers is huge. And this is one of the big points of discussion in South Asia. Like if you go to some of the meetings of the UNSCAP, like United Nations Social and Economic Council for the Asian Pacific. So they will talk about these issues, that manufacturing has not really worked out in South Asia. And Bangladesh, we went for manufacturing. It is, I think, not something very much of a Bangladeshi phenomenon, because a lot of other countries have also gone into manufacturing, and especially RMG. Like if you look into China or, for example, Vietnam, a lot of other countries have also gotten into RMG, because I think it's one area where developing countries can get into quite easily, and because it's very labor intensive. So for countries like Bangladesh, which has a huge abundance of workers, it's a very suitable industry to employ a lot of people. And it's also not very technical, in the sense that the equipment that's required, it's not very sophisticated, or it's not very state of the art. It's mostly basic equipment, more or less. And the training required for workers to get into this is not also very difficult. And one good thing that has happened for us so far, and now it's not all that good anymore, is that it's one place where robots have not really been successful so far. But now things are changing now, because of very advanced, robotics and optics and new lasers and machine learning technology. So robots are now quite advanced. So now they can also do some of the work that workers traditionally used to do. But for a long time, this was one place where robots could not sew clothes. They could do everything. They could, launch rockets into space. But making clothes, it was something that you needed that human touch. So in that place, I think it worked out for us.
That's very poetic. And this brings me to another point that you said, which is low wages, which sort of helped the Bangladeshi economy, even if it wasn't something that people as individuals appreciated very much. But I think, when it comes to sort of the structure of an economy, where as a country develops more and more, wages also go up, right? So, how do you see that working out in the case of Bangladesh?
Yeah, so the wages will go up, and eventually you have to pay workers much more than what you are paying right now. But it's not a problem if the wages are also going up in other countries, because Bangladesh is not only developing on its own. its other competitors who are also manufacturing and exporting ready-made garments, they are also developing. And wages in their countries are also increasing. Like wages in China are much higher now in Bangladesh. So wages in China are also increasing. China is the largest RMG manufacturer, ready-made garments manufacturer in the world. So it's not a problem for us if their wages are also rising, our wages are also rising, and we are still relatively lower than them. And as long as that's the case, it's fine for us. But the problem arises when the wages in Bangladesh are significantly higher than its competitors. That's only when we need to think about alternative methods, or we need to think about new technology to minimize the role of workers, or some other issues maybe. But as long as our wages are relatively lower than our competitors, it should be fine. Increases in wages should not be a problem.
And this is sort of just a question that came to my mind. But for a lot of people who aren't familiar with the Bangladeshi economy, apart from the ready-made garment sector, what are other important aspects of the Bangladeshi economy? What are other fields that make up the economy?
So there are several other fields, like we have a booming services sector also. Bangladesh is doing well in terms of freelancing and the gig economy. Like people are working online, they're getting assignments, they're working online. And Bangladesh, and if you think more in terms of more formal economy, then Bangladesh is doing well in its pharmaceutical sector, because Bangladesh is getting a waiver in the World Trade Organization's trade related intellectual property rights agreement. Because as a least developed country, Bangladesh can manufacture and export pharmaceuticals without having to go through the patent and trademark obligations like other countries have to. So even if some medicines are patented, we can still produce them and we can still export them as a least developed country. So that has really helped our pharmaceutical sector as well. And many of the medicines which are quite expensive in like America or Europe, you can get them here in Bangladesh quite cheaply. And we are also exporting those to many other countries. So that, I think, is a big part of our exports. And that also is an important sector for us. We also have a good footwear and leather sector, which we're doing well in. And that also is a very kind of ironic, because it's a tragic comedy. Because if you have to do well in leather, then here also you have to keep the costs down. And here also there are lots of environmental regulations and standards. And one reason I feel Bangladesh has done so well so far is because our environmental regulations and standards have not been enforced on the leather industry all that much. Because if they were, then our costs would rise a lot. And so here also we need to think, like, how will we go forward in the future with more regulations, more standards, because all these things will affect our leather industry and also our RMG, ready-made garments industry, I think. So that is a challenge in the coming days, to move forward with the same competitiveness but still maintain those international standards.
That makes sense. And it makes me wonder, in moving from a least developing country to a developing country, what are some of the other advantages that Bangladesh got from international organizations that it will not have anymore if it becomes a developing country, when
So
it becomes a developing
So
country?
after we get out of our least developed country group, what's going to happen is that we are going to lose the duty-free, quota-free access to our largest export market, which is the European Union. So we will lose that access in 3 years. They'll give us a 3-year grace period from 2024 to 2027. And after those 3 years, we will lose our duty-free, quota-free access to the European Union. And that is going to be the biggest loss, I think, in terms of our graduation from the least developed country group, because the European Union is a major market for our ready-made garments export. But we do have an option to go for their generalized system of preferences, the GSP and the GSP plus. But the GSP and the GSP plus are going to be much more difficult for us to obtain, because there are obligations and certain criteria which must be met. Like right now, we are not sort of eligible for GSP plus because there are two clauses. I think one of them is regarding child labor, and the other is probably about health and safety. I'm not sure. But those clauses, we are not completely compliant with GSP plus as of now. So we have to prepare ourselves accordingly, and so that within 2027 we are ready for GSP plus, so that we can take that. Otherwise, it's going to be a big problem for us. And the other one that I mentioned earlier is that the World Trade Organization's trade-related intellectual property rights. So that over there we get two waivers. One is for the pharmaceuticals, which is the pharmaceuticals waiver, which allows us to produce and export patented medicines without any kind of legal problems. And the other is the general waiver, which gives us access to other goods and services, like, for example, books and all those things. We can also do that. So the World Trade Organization, what they have come up with is that they will allow all least developed countries to benefit from these two waivers until 2033. But Bangladesh will graduate from the least developed country status in 2024. So around roughly 9-10 years of extra benefits from those waivers will be lost because of our graduation. So that also is something we need to consider. And that is also something, as a whole, I think the World Trade Organization should consider that why is the waiver for least developed countries only up to a certain limit? Because the idea is that if you are a least developed country, you actually don't have that technology to basically meet all the patent requirements, because all the technology is being held by the developed countries. So there should not be any limit to how long these countries should actually benefit from these waivers. These waivers should be given indefinitely for all least developed countries. But even though we are graduating out of it, but still, I feel the other countries who will remain in least developed country status after 2033, they will find it quite difficult to comply with all these things.
That's very interesting. Why did the WTO set this deadline of 2033, if I might ask?
I'm not sure, because the whole idea of they have their own reasoning, I'm sure, because they feel that intellectual property rights are good for invention. They promote invention, they promote innovation, and if our intellectual property rights are not ensured, then innovation will be significantly slowed down. Inventors will not find any market incentive for making profit. So they feel this is their main logic behind promoting intellectual property rights. But then again, there's also the other side of the argument. Like, from the WTO argument, it seems like that profit is the mother of invention. But actually, necessity is the mother of invention. And if you look at the most important inventions in human history, like you have studied in China, maybe, so the three great Chinese inventions like compass, gunpowder, and paper. None of them were profit motivated. So they were all there when there was no such concept of intellectual property rights. So actually, it's not always profit that's motivating invention and innovation.
Yeah, I've heard both sides of the argument with intellectual property rights. I think, all of us who live in the global south, as they put it,
Yeah,
have come upon this in various times. And I think um, it's very difficult for developing countries to sort of invest in R&D, to sort of come up with innovation the same way that you do entrepreneurship and innovation in the West, simply because we don't have the structures and the institutions that sort of support that. So, if as a poor Indian woman, I want to get a patent for something that I've done, it's going to be a very long, drawn out process, and I won't even be aware of it. Whereas it would be much easier, perhaps, in a developed country. It also brings me to the idea of, you mentioned sort of duty free access to the European Union till 2027. What are the major export destinations of Bangladesh? Who are Bangladesh's major economic trade partners?
so if you think of RMG, then it's obviously the European Union, and within the European Union, it's Germany, which is the largest export destination. And apart from that, we have other major trading partners. Like for RMG, there is the UK, the United Kingdom, and also the United States of America. Those are big markets for RMG. But in terms of overall trading partner, I think India and China are quite important trading partners. Like, if you think of the volume of both exports and imports, then India and China are traditionally quite large and quite important as partners for trade.
And with respect to investment?
With respect to investment, recently we have had a lot of Chinese investment coming into Bangladesh. But traditionally, our foreign investors have come from North America and from Europe. So there is the Netherlands, there is UK, USA, those countries, and also Japan. JICA is also a major development partner for Bangladesh. So those countries have played a role. JICA and also Korea, South Korea.
Yeah. And it's also very interesting because a lot of countries in East Asia, as you'd mentioned, had also followed sort of the same trajectory that Bangladesh is following, right? Sort of going through manufacturing and then evolving through other industries. Um, it makes me wonder so there is one side of the economy, but I think economic progress doesn't happen in isolation. What I found very impressive about the Bangladesh's economic development is how high it scores on human development indicators, whether it's life expectancy, whether it's infant mortality and mean years of schooling, all of that. And I actually remember reading a study that said that between 1990 and 2019, sorry, yeah, between 1990 and 2019, Bangladesh's HDI value increased by more than 60%. And so it makes me wonder, how did Bangladesh make so much progress in sort of these social development indicators?
So basically, the Human Development Index has three components. One is per capita income, and then there is also the education mean years of schooling and the healthcare and life expectancy that you mentioned. So in terms of per capita income, like I said in the first, most important point was that Bangladesh has controlled its population quite successfully. So per capita income, basically what happens is you take the total national income, you divide it by the total population. So if your national income is growing and if your population is also growing, then your per capita income will rise. But the idea is that you want your national income to grow faster than your population so that people as a whole become better off. So I think we have achieved that quite successfully. Our economy has grown fast enough, and we have also been able to slow down our population growth so that per capita income component of HDI is something we worked on. And in terms of education, in the 1980s, Bangladesh went for a pilot study for a female secondary education stipend. So over there, girls were paid a small amount of money from the government just for being in school from grades 6 to 10. So from completing high school, they were paid a small amount of money, and they were also asked to maintain a certain, like 75% attendance and 45% marks in their exams, and also remaining unmarried till the age of 18. So this pilot female education stipend program was quite successful. And later in early 1990s, like in 1994, I think, Bangladesh went for it on a nationwide scale, the female education stipend program. And since then, it has been hugely successful, and many girls have been encouraged to come into schools, and our ratio of female students in high schools has increased tremendously. So that, I think, was a big, success story for Bangladesh, because that helped us increase our education indicators. It improved all our education indicators. And at the same time, what happened is that it reduced fertility. It delayed the age of marriage. It also helped us with greater female labor force participation. So it had a lot of catalytic benefits all across the board. And in terms of healthcare, obviously, maternal mortality, infant mortality, all of these have come down quite a bit. And that is something which the government has made it a point that they will go for it. And we have like large number of community clinics from the government who are working all across the nation. But also, what's happening is that our non-state actors are also playing a role. The non-government organizations, such as we have BRAC and we have Grameen Bank and all these are very large non-government organizations, and they were all founded in Bangladesh, and they have over the years played a big role in terms of, like for example, raising awareness on healthcare issues and on nutrition and child health and all these things. So this was also something I think which happened in Bangladesh, which didn't happen in other countries.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to another thing that we mentioned before, which is female labor force participation. And I think what's interesting with India is that more and more women were educated in India. In fact, like female education is extremely high, but it doesn't translate into the workforce because I think what's happened in sort of the last decade since 2005 is that as more families become rich, what happens is that then women choose to stay back in the household rather than go out to work. So I think this is a very peculiar phenomenon that was particular to India. I'm not sure if it's there in Bangladesh, but the more families developed, the more women chose to stay at home instead of participating in the workforce. And that's very interesting because the Indian, I think, female labor force participation is now in its mid 20s. I think it's 25, 28%. And I know that Bangladesh is a little higher than that. It's in its 38, perhaps 37, 38. I could be wrong. But how does female labor force participation work in that sense?
So, we did a study on youth employment in Bangladesh quite recently. And there, one of the things we looked at is the thing it's called not in education, employment, or training. So, it's a status of a person who is not in school, they're not in training, and they're not employed either. So, they're unemployed and they're not in any kind of productive activity either. So, very large portion of these people who are not in education, employment, or training, a large portion of them are women. They're female. The majority of them are female. So we did a study and we did a lot of, both empirical, like we used national labor force survey data. We also spoke with young people from all across Bangladesh in focus group discussions, and we did surveys and all those things. And we found that one of the main reasons why women are not in education, employment, or training is because of the burden of unpaid care work. So they feel that they have to stay home, they have to take care of their children, they have to do all the household work. And that, I think, has, discouraged a lot of women from going into the labor force. So I think if we can address this issue of unpaid care work, if we can make it more obvious that it has economic value, and if we can encourage, some kind of cultural and social change and reform, so that household work becomes work for all people in the household, not just for women. So if that we can do, then I think labor force participation for women can be increased both in India and in Bangladesh, because some of these social norms are quite common all across South Asia, that women will stay home, they will take care of the children, they'll do all the household work. But that, I think, is a major, obstacle for women from getting into the labor force.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think um, the burden of unpaid work, particularly household work, falls majorly. And that's something that's been evident through COVID-19, particularly, and how that's affected unemployment, at least in India. And it makes me wonder when it comes to Bangladesh. So one of the reasons I think in India there has been sort of little political will to go beyond rhetoric to improve female labor force participation. I mean, I know that it's become a phenomenon that's only recently been talked about, but I think that while there has been a lot of sensitization about, stopping a female feticide or infanticide and improving indicators on those levels, women as contributing to the economy in a major way isn't something that comes up politically often. It's something that I feel in India. How do you think that's mirrored in Bangladesh?
Yeah, but there is this cultural thing that I mentioned. This is common across South Asia and also throughout the world. If you look at the numbers, you'll see throughout the world, women are working from 2 to 3 times, sometimes even 5 times more in terms of unpaid care work and unpaid household work. Women are spending 2 to 3 or maybe even 5 times more time every day doing the household work and doing the unpaid care work. And you can also see that women are sleeping less than men because of the burden of all this work. So this is something that is a problem across the world, I think, in many countries, except maybe in some countries they are gradually coming to a place where this is becoming less of a problem. Like in some Scandinavian countries, we see that maternity leave and paternity leave has become equal, so that they are trying to come to the point where they are trying to establish that caring for the children is not only something which is something that has to be done exclusively by women. Men also should take part in it equally. So this is a problem, and this will require lots of cultural change. This is something like in most of the rights that women enjoy, most of the privileges that women enjoy now have come through lots of reform and lots of struggles and lots of debate. So I think this also will has to go through that phase, and this will take some time.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah,
I do think it will take a lot of time,
yeah,
not as much as it should, but
yeah,
that's the way the world is, right?
that's right.
When it comes to the economy, on a completely different note, how do you think politics in Bangladesh affects the economy? In the sense of, I think there is a lot of cognizance, not only in Bangladesh, but across South Asia, of corruption, for example, as a major problem in the region. But how do you think politically, do you see a difference between various parties in tackling economic issues, or is there sort of a political consensus on the way forward?
Politics does affect economic issues, but I think for Bangladesh, what has happened is that every time there was a change of political leadership, every time there was a change of parties within the system, the parties who are taking the position of government. So every time that has happened, the transition from power has not always been very smooth. So that I think has affected our economy. Every time you see there's an election year, then the economy struggles and suffers from certain problems. So that I think is something we need to work on, because in a properly functioning democracy, transition of power should be smooth. So that is something you need to work on. But apart from that, I don't think our political parties have had any, like they have not had any separate or different views on corruption. All of our major parties have publicly had this position of trying to cut down on corruption and trying to reduce all kinds of suppose illicit financial outflows and all those things. So if you think of the official stance, I think the parties are not major political parties are not very different in terms of tackling corruption.
And they don't take vastly different positions on the economy either, right? They more or less have continuity,
Yeah,
except when it comes to power
yeah.
transition.
So if you see from 1990s onwards, I think most of the major political parties have had a similar stance towards the economy, because from 1990s we began that phase of privatization and deregulation, and that has continued, I think, till the present day. But before that, we had a much more nationalized economy. The role of the government was much more significant in economic activities, and a lot of sectors were completely nationalized. Like we did not have any private television channels, we didn't have any private radio stations, and we didn't have any private universities. For example, I've graduated from a private university, so we didn't have all of those things. So from the 1990s onwards, we began that phase of privatization and deregulation, and I think that has continued till the present day. And the major political parties are quite similar in their stance, I think.
And is that trend of liberalization set to continue, considering sort of the wave of protectionism that's going on across the world?
Yeah, it will continue, because in some cases, what happens is that unless you are offering some benefits or privileges to your trading partners, they will also not be offering any kinds of benefits for you, because trade is a reciprocal activity. So it's something that you have to, come up with win-win trade deals. Otherwise, you won't be able to trade. So I think some of the kind of trade liberalization and overall deregulation will continue, but obviously we will take into consideration our own national interest as well. But some level of liberalization will continue, and usually what happens is that economies which are doing well, they tend to go for more trade liberalization, whereas economies which are slowing down, they try to close down their doors, and they become more protectionist. So for us, I think since we are doing well, we can have that leverage to kind of go for some level of trade liberalization. Because if that brings us more benefits, if that gets us better market access to important markets, then why not?
Exactly. Why not? I think I remember reading that, even with COVID-19, the Bangladesh economy was set to grow at about 4%, which is pretty amazing considering how badly other countries around the world, including India, are doing. But one thing that makes me wonder when we talk sort of about protectionism and considering how closed borders are across the world, remittances are a huge part of the Bangladeshi economy, I would assume. How have they been affected by COVID?
Yeah, remittances have been slowed down quite significantly, and hundreds of thousands of workers have returned home from their workplaces all across the world. And the problem is that in case of remittances, what happens is, because the COVID-19 is now a pandemic all across the world. So even if we as a country can control the virus, and if we can get our infection rates down, and if our workers are healthy enough to return to their host countries, the problem is if the host country is not also doing the same, if they are having a very tough time, then it's very hard for us to send them back. Because from the ethical standpoint also, it's hard for us to send someone in a place where it's not safe for them. And also from the logistical point of view, sometimes the airports are closed, the borders are closed, so there's no way we can send them back. So I think in terms of remittances, this is a place where we have to have global solidarity. If the countries are not working together to fight COVID-19, if they are thinking that, oh, this vaccine is made in that country, so we're not going to use it. So if these things are happening, then it's very difficult, because COVID-19 is a global problem. It's a threat to all people all across the world. So unless we can have some solidarity and fighting it together, I think it will be hard for countries like Bangladesh and Nepal, which are heavily dependent on remittances, to go back to where they were, because our workers will not be able to return if those countries are struggling with the virus. And you have to understand that Bangladesh as a country and as an economy is still quite small. But in terms of population, Bangladesh is very large, and the Bangladesh economy at present, or even in the near future, I don't see that the Bangladesh economy will be large enough to employ all the Bangladeshis living all across the world. And that is true for, I think, for several countries. And because unless our workers can go abroad and they can seek opportunities abroad, we will not be able to employ all of them. And if they all return back to Bangladesh, then it will be quite difficult for us to absorb them in our domestic labor force. And also, some of the workers that were working in sectors which are struggling all across the world, like, for example, hospitality and restaurant businesses, those businesses are still struggling in Bangladesh even. So it's hard for us to absorb them.
That's extremely fair. And it makes me wonder, with sort of the new normal that COVID has brought in, with the dynamics of the economy all around the world, and, with Bangladesh's own development, what are your own sort of hopes and fears for Bangladesh in the short and medium term?
So the hope is obviously that the virus will go away. That is the first hope, which all countries are hoping, that the virus will go away, or we will come up with good, medicines for it and vaccines for it. And the risks that lie in the short and medium term are, one of them I already mentioned, that Bangladesh is graduating from the least developed country group. So that is something which we need to work our way through to 2024. We need to prepare accordingly so that our graduation is smooth and we can graduate with momentum, and so that we are not slowed down after we lose some of the international support measures for that we used to get. And also, there are other issues. Obviously, one very big issue is climate change and global warming. As you know, Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change and global warming, and sea level rise is causing a huge problem for us. And many areas of the country, with many coastal areas of Bangladesh, will become flooded and inundated because of sea level rise, and people will be, they will have to move away from their homes. People who are living near rivers and in the coastal areas, their houses will be destroyed. the farmlands will be destroyed, and because of saltwater intrusion, our agricultural productivity is, growing down. So climate change, I think, is a very big problem, and this is one place where Bangladesh has contributed very little to climate change, but it has received the whole, the full package of damage and all the problems that come with climate change, such as sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, more natural disasters and cyclones. So all of these things are happening in Bangladesh, and this, I think, will in the coming days, this is something a huge cause for concern for us.
Definitely. I think that Bangladesh does get it bears a huge brunt of climate change, particularly because of its location. And this brings me to my last question. What books or resources would you recommend for people who are interested in reading more about Bangladesh and about Bangladesh's economy?
So there are a number of books and resources. One book I would recommend for if you want to have a historical perspective on the Bangladesh economy is this book. It's called From Two Economies to Two Nations. It's by Professor Rehman Sovan. So this is a collection of his writings from 1961 to 1971, where he talked about how the west and east wings of Pakistan were so different from each other that they could be considered as separate economies on their own. So that was his two economy theory, that the two economies within one nation. So and that gave rise to the Bangladeshi nationalism and the economic basis of Bangladeshi nationalism, that these two wings are so different and there's so much inequality between them that it's time for them to separate and become separate countries. So this I would highly recommend. The other book also, which is by someone very well known, is this one. It's A World Without Poverty by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus. Over here, he talks about his journey and how he started with microcredit and how it was like one poor woman who couldn't get a loan. Then he offered her a loan, and then he saw that small borrowers are quite resilient. They're willing to pay back, and they can make good use. And also, everyone can become an entrepreneur if they are just, empowered at the right time in the right way. And a few others. I would take this opportunity to also talk about my own book. This is Youth Employment in Bangladesh, which was published recently by Palgrave Macmillan. So if you want to know about the problems which are affecting the young people of Bangladesh and what are the policies required for Bangladesh to get into and benefit from the demographic dividend, because we have a huge young population in Bangladesh. So how can we make better use of that population? We talk about that in our book. And also another book which we launched from our think tank, which a lot of our researchers have worked on, is Quest for Inclusive Growth in Bangladesh. And over here, I wrote a chapter on social protection. So over here, we talk about a lot of things. Like we talk about an inclusive growth strategy for Bangladesh, so that the benefits of growth, because our country is growing fast, but the benefits of growth are not always, divided in an equitable way. So we come up with an inclusive growth strategy for the country. And I think this is something which can be, replicated in other countries as well.
Awesome. Yusuf, thank you so much for taking your time out to speak with us. I really enjoyed knowing so much more about the Bangladesh economy than I did before. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Hamzani. It was a pleasure talking to you.
That brings us to the end of this episode of States of Anarchy. Thank you for staying with us. The reading for the episode is in the bio as always, so I do recommend checking those out. If you have any questions or comments, just email me at ibmstatesofanarchy@gmail.com or send me a direct message on social media. I'm at Hamsini H on Twitter and at States of Anarchy on Instagram. As we enter into 2021, I want to make sure that States of Anarchy reaches more people, and you can help. Send this episode to someone you think may enjoy it. You can also leave us a rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. You can listen to States of Anarchy not only on the Ibm Podcast app and website, but on iTunes, Spotify, Ghana, Google Podcasts, or whatever you're using right now. We'll be back next week.
Do you wonder what goes inside the mind of an achiever? How do they manage to get back up on their feet in spite of their failures? Do they really do something different? You're absolutely right. Yes, they do. I'm Aditi Surana. Join me every Wednesday and Friday on my show Absolutely Right, where I use my special tool of handwriting analysis, also known as graphology, to interview high performers and study secrets behind their success and personality. You can catch us on the IBM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.
In a world of masks, you can't see our lips smile. But that's fine, because our eyes smile, our hearts smile, our entire being smiles. And when you hear of ordinary Indians doing extraordinary things, the nation smiles. A happy and beautiful smile. You can catch Smile India with Shifa Maitra every Monday and Wednesday on the IBM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from. It's a 5-minute smile.